We've got one more effect that we're going to add to our animation, and that's a drop shadow. Now to do that, I'm going to need one more copy of the golf ball, and it's going to need to be moving. So let me just go up to my timeline here, and I'll just move the playhead so it's all the way back here at frame 1. And I'll select the golf ball. Now, clicking on the layer itself grabs the whole motion tween and everything all the way out to the end. We've seen two ways to move the items around: copy and paste motion, and using a motion preset. Our final way will actually take the object and the motion tween all in one swoop. I've got it all selected right here, so I'm going to go up to my Edit menu. And down under Timeline, I'm going to choose Copy Frames. Now when you copy frames, you're actually copying all the selected frames that you have up in the timeline, including all the keyframe settings and anything to do with your motion tween. We're also copying the golf ball itself. So if I just go up here above Highlight and create a new layer that we can work with, I'm going to click on that layer to make sure that all the frames are selected, and then I'll go back to my Edit panel under Timeline and choose Paste Frames. Now you'll notice it copies the entire layer, even the name, but I'm going to change this name to Shadow. And now that we've got a copy of the golf ball, we can see how to set the shadow up. Back here at frame 1, if I click on the golf ball, and we take a look at the properties, what we're going to do is we're going to use the Filters panel down here at the bottom. Now, this is one of the properties that movie clips get that some of our other symbols, like graphic symbols, don't get. So we need to have a movie clip here for this. I can add a filter just by going down to the bottom panel here and choosing the Add Filter button. And then we can just pick a drop shadow. Now, let me close up my color effect and position panels to give ourselves a little bit more room. We've got a whole bunch of settings that affect how that drop shadow is going to look. The first thing I like to do is knock back the strength so it's not quite as dark. And then we can adjust blurring as needed, but it looks like 5 pixels is actually pretty good. I also want to set the angle of the shadow to match a light source on this side projecting a shadow off the back of my object. And we can just change that angle here. I'll just click and drag in that panel, and you can see that my setting is moving until it goes around to the back of the ball. Now the drop shadow we're seeing is the shadow that we would expect to see on a very flat panel right behind our object. But what we really need is a shadow that's going to look correct and make our background look like it really is reaching back into space instead of just a flat 2D projection. So let's try out one more setting on the property panel down here at the bottom. Right down here at the lower end near color, we have Hide Object. Now this is interesting because when I click that, what we end up with is just the shadow and not the object casting it. Now you can see why I made a copy of the golf ball layer. We can manipulate the invisible golf ball to create whatever shadow we want. And since we already have the animation set up on it, it's going to follow along with the ball and the other layers that we've set up with the animation. To change the shadow, I'm just going to go switch to my normal free transform tool. We'll click on the layer with the shadow. And of course we get our normal handles here. Now let me just move over just a tiny bit so we can see what's going on. I'm going to place my cursor in the middle of the two handles, and that gives me a skew tool. That way I can pull the shadow around a little bit and stretch it out, and that makes it look like it's projected along an axis there. I'll also resize the shadow vertically. We'll squish it down, and I want to move it down a little bit so it looks like it's on the ball. But I'm not going to do it with all of the elements that we have here. I want the shadow to track along with the ball, so I'm actually going to grab the entire animation. You can see that I've grabbed the pink line right here, and with my move tool I can just move the entire animation down. Now that makes sure that I don't mess up these keyframes here later. My animation will still follow along with the ball and do everything that the ball is going to do. Now I should probably move it over just a little bit. Again, moving the path so that all of my keyframes are moved. And lastly, I'll make sure that the shadow is behind the ball by moving the shadow layer down beneath the golf ball layer. Now let me click away so we can see what we've created. We now should have a little shadow following our ball as it rolls in and drops into the cup. Now we still have some settings to do here. Right at the cup level, as the ball starts to drop into the hole, that shadow looks a little bit cut off as it's running down the edge of the hole. Now remember, we only have a little bit of green covering up this area so that we can make it look like the ball's dropping behind and into the hole. And I need to set up the shadow so it's going to do the same thing. Well, we can animate our shadow properties just like we can animate any of our other properties inside of a motion tween. Now I'll just click on that shadow layer so we can pull up the properties for it. Looks like I might have to click away from everything once and then go back and just grab that shadow. And there we can see our properties, including the drop shadow properties. Now, since I'm in the middle of a motion tween, if I make a change to any one of these properties, it's going to make a keyframe. And what I'm going to do is change the strength. Now, let me just drop it just a tiny bit here. And what I want you all to see is that we've got a keyframe dropped in here that measures that change in our shadow. Now all I'm going to do is move this playhead a little bit further forward. As the ball starts to drop into the hole, I'm going to select the shadow once again, and I'm going to set the strength all the way down to 0. I'll just click and drag left, and you can see that my shadow completely disappears. So basically what happens is we have a shadow all the way along, we have a small change in our shadow right at this first keyframe, and by the time the second one comes up, the shadow will have disappeared. And that's okay because it's just quick enough that it'll look like our ball drops right into the hole. Let's try a test movie just to see how everything all looks together. Once again, I'll choose Flash Professional. That will open up our animation, and then you can see it drop right into the hole. Let's close that on up.